Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 521 Fighting Alone Against Millions of Enemies, Part 3 Last. Xietain had consumed 40 mana points to activate lightning movement, and apart from that, he had consumed about 6 more points to change the blood from its natural liquid state to a solid state, powerful enough to pierce through the bodies of zombies below level 20 without any problems. Thanks to the factor that the blood manipulation skill did not consume blood to manipulate blood that existed outside an organism, and only consume blood to change the physical state of the element, or to enhance the power of the modified blood, Xietain had consumed only 46 mana points in total during the entire battle that had passed. Therefore, when he converted 200 stamina points into 200 mana points, his mana stat now looked like this when he checked it. Mana 905, 951, plus 65. The mana stat of Xietain in his normal state was 751 points, without adding the stat points obtained thanks to external treasures. So, when he converted 200 stamina points into mana, not only did his mana stat increase 200 points, but even with the consumption of 46 points above, the total mana of Xietain still exceeded his base mana by a wide margin, without the 200 stamina points added. Blood spears, Xietain shouted out loud as he beheaded 2 level 15 zombies. 3 slightly blackish-colored spears formed from the blood of the slain zombies, and under his careful control, flew in different directions. One flew to his left, the other flew to his right, and the last one flew to the area behind him. The 3 lightning clones were unintelligent beings, but Xietain could control them as long as he wanted to, and as long as he was willing to take his attention off the battlefield for a brief moment. Then, as the 3 black spears flew towards them, the 3 clones extended their arms forward in unison, and caught the weapons in mid-flight. Kill? Receiving the order from the main body, the 3 now armed clones turned into ferocious tigers. With the skill Special Forces Soldier being one of the skills attached to the soul of Xietain, and with the clones also being linked to his soul, these 3 clones now in possession of weapons, began to slaughter zombies with even more tenacity than before. Xietain was no different from his clones, in fact, he was much more ferocious. Under his golden spear and the blades of wind generated by each swing of his weapon that cut through everything in its path, the zombies promptly began to fall. 5 seconds passed in the blink of an eye, and just as the faint golden light covering Xietain's body faded away, he quickly rechecked his mana stat. Mana 751, plus 65. Ha 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 ha. Xietain laughed out loud as he controlled the blood bullets to pierce the brains of 100 zombies with precision, and at the same time swung his spear behind him to help the rear clone who was overwhelmed. Xietain's arrogance and pride naturally shot through the roof once his experiment proved to be a massive success. By converting mana into stamina in large amounts and then doing the same in the opposite direction, Xietain was able to overcome the 50 stamina consumption that the second activation overlap regeneration needed to be activated, and at the same time, he would be able to overcome the stamina consumption of his 3 clones. Xietain was now even able to activate his skills with complete freedom. Xietain roared as he continued controlling overlap regeneration internally, and alternated between mana and stamina, once every 5 seconds. Bang! A ferocious burst of mana erupted from the body of Xietain, and under the impulse of over 900 magic points, his magic power went berserk, as the rune of the skill blood manipulation lit up brightly. Consuming 300 mana points directly, Xietain controlled and empowered the blood around him to shape over 2,000 black spears. The black spears soared into the sky before plummeting over the bridge. Boom, 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 boom. The bodies of the zombies exploded after being struck by the powerful spears charged with magical power. However, even more striking than the fact that a large patch of previously occupied land suddenly became uninhabited was the fact that the blackish spears did not damage the bridge at all, as after killing the zombies, the spears changed into liquid once again. A second later, however, the same spears came out again from the huge pool of rotten blood, and proceeded to slaughter more zombies. 30 minutes passed and Xietain's mana and stamina were oscillating fiercely. Every 5 seconds, one of his stats would drop powerfully, only to recover completely 5 seconds later, and swap places between each other. However, during those 30 minutes, neither Xietain's mana nor stamina stats had actually decreased. Although one of the two was always dropping, 5 seconds later it would immediately return to its maximum. Xietain had turned into a truly terrifying war machine. He had no compunction about consuming large amounts of mana to conjure weapons and annihilate his enemies, while being careful not to damage the bridge. He had even consumed 500 mana points in one go to spread a black blood fog over 5 kilometers and annihilate 70% of the zombies within that area. During those 30 minutes, the number of zombies that Xietain and his 3 clones had slaughtered exceeded 1 million. More than 1 million zombies in half an hour. What kind of concept was this? At this rate, he could even annihilate the 20 million zombies during the course of the morning, and by the afternoon at the most, the task that had previously seemed impossible would be finished. Armies? So what if hundreds of thousands or even millions of enemies were to come? In front of me, the numbers are nothing but insignificant pieces of paper. In front of me, Xietain, the only choice is to submit or perish. Xietan's arrogance soared beyond the stratosphere, and it really reached the heavens when he looked at his stats and realized that as long as he didn't cast a magic spell that overcame his stamina, he would always be able to return his mana to its peak condition. The second activation God of War's partial possession was truly terrifying. When the fighting instinct of Xietain was triggered, his confidence would grow to the point of blindness. In fact, in his current state, were it not for the fact that the title Brilliant Mind was suppressing the effects by 10%, Xietain might have lost the most important point of his personality. What was the most crucial point in Xietan's personality? What was the most important characteristic and the main reason why he had survived to this day, despite the seemingly impossible difficulties that had come his way? It was not his tenacity, nor was it his cruelty to himself, it was his caution. After having advanced approximately 20 kilometers of the 100 kilometers that the Eastern Dragon's Back Bridge extended over in the span of an hour, and having slaughtered over 2,500,000 zombies, Xietain suddenly realized that something was wrong. His vision began to blur, his movement speed dropped even though there were no enemies able to stop his footsteps, his attack speed and swinging speed also dropped, his spear movements were no longer as lethal as before, his head began to ache, and even something deep inside him began to show signs of hurting. All these were extremely subtle changes, and so small that by themselves Xietain might not have noticed them under the effect of the God of War's partial possession. However, all these negative effects attacking his system at the same time could not bypass the ever-cautious heart of Xietain. What is going on? Xietan's heart clenched and alarms began to sound powerfully inside his head. However, with his self-confidence and the arrogance in his heart so high, it was difficult to think clearly. Therefore, even though Xietain had willingly slowed down the speed at which he slaughtered zombies, it was not easy to find the point in question. Controlling his own spear, controlling his clones partially or giving orders remotely, controlling the blood spears while keeping the blood manipulation skill active at all times, activating regeneration and overlap regeneration every 5 seconds, converting stamina to mana and mana to stamina, staying away from the zombie's claws or bites, studying the surroundings, thinking about his next move, being alert to avoid ambush by a powerful enemy, and so on. The number of simultaneous tasks Xietain was performing without a break was simply too numerous at this point. Were it not for his especially powerful soul, thanks to his having nurtured it with tremendously pure soul power, Xietain would have collapsed long ago. In fact, any other soul evolver could not have done what he had been doing for more than 2 hours at a stretch. However, everything had limits in this world. Even the seemingly all-powerful higher existences could not do as they pleased, let alone a first-order lower existence. Regardless of how strong the soul of Xietain was, it had limits to what it could handle. If he was a second-order existence and all the soul power he had been accumulating all this time had been attached and strengthened to his soul, then perhaps there would be no problems. However, the current him was overtaxing himself too much. An hour later, Xietan's death count had broken 3 million zombies. Approximately 500,000 enemies in 60 minutes was undoubtedly an impressive feat considering the fact that among those 500,000, there were even around 10 that were within the same order of power than Xietain was. However, compared to killing over 1 million zombies in the same amount of time over the past 2 hours, having killed 500,000 zombies was no longer as impressive as it should be. His body slowly began to stiffen, and his face was covered in sweat. Moreover, even though all his stats were actually at their peak almost all the time, Xietan's face was getting more and more sickly pale. Cough. Suddenly, Xietan's movement stopped, and he could do nothing to avoid coughing up a mouthful of fresh blood. Xietan's eyes twitched as he saw globules of blood among the blood that had just flowed out of his body on its own, and it was then that the alarm within him overcame his natural arrogance. Damn it. It's this damn thing? Xietain cursed under his breath as his face contracted in pain. How could he not realize what the problem was when his soul seemed to writhe inside his body, and one of the most excruciating pains he had experienced so far assaulted him for a brief split second. Xietain's soul was currently something similar to a gas that was all over every part of his body. However, he realized that this gas was now less potent than before, similar to when viruses attack the immune system and weaken the body by awakening illnesses. By using overlap regeneration without caution for so long, Xietain finally realized that while this new skill was powerful, it was not as if he could do whatever he wanted with it. What were stats? It was the power of the soul of an existence represented in numbers, and since the soul also affected the fleshly body, if the soul suffered, the fleshly body would naturally experience suffering. By using overlap regeneration without prejudice and constantly subtracting and adding large numbers from one stat to another, what Xietain had overlooked was that in order to subtract X amount of stat to another stat, what he was doing was actually modifying his own soul. By adding more weight to some parts of his soul than what it should naturally have, his soul slowly began to get injured. His own body tried to warn him of this by heightening his senses and hindering his battle power, but as Xietain still did not understand where the problem lay, he simply continued fighting. Now, he finally realized that at this rate he could find himself in tremendously severe trouble. In fact, his current soul had been injured by 5%, and Xietain was not able to use his full strength anymore. This had been the cost of him trying to rush things too much, while trying not to use his full strength. Xietain had done his best to restrain himself from damaging the bridge, but had consequently made use of a new power which he was not yet clearly aware of in an unrestrained manner. Xietain decided that the morning was enough, and that it would be better to rest for an hour or two to calm down. After resting for a while, even if his soul was slightly damaged, it was no problem since with his current strength, he still didn't need to fear anything. However, Xietain had barely retreated 100 meters after disconnecting the 3 clones to avoid losing stamina when his body suddenly stopped. Swoosh! A bubble of air suddenly appeared around him and covered him completely. Then, under Xietan's disbelieving eyes, his body began to slowly rise into the sky. He looked down and noticed that, at some point, a female zombie had appeared behind him, looking at him with cold and indifferent red eyes. This female zombie, despite looking terrifying, did not look too bad when compared to the other zombies Xietain had seen throughout the morning. However, what was more disturbing was that unlike the unclassified zombies or the first-order zombies, this female zombie not only looked much more powerful, but also seemed to have some degree of intelligence. In addition, Xietain also noticed a male zombie blocking the path through which he planned to retreat, even though a second ago there was no one in the area. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 522. A new type of zombie and zombie commander. The two zombies looked significantly stronger than any other zombie Xietain had ever faced before. In fact, just judging from the aura of the two creatures that were looking down at him from the ground as their body was lifted into the air by a strange air bubble, Xietain judged accurately that based on the soul power writhing within the bodies of each of them, either the male zombie or the female zombie were creatures that had already broken through the barrier of the first order and had set their feet firmly in the second order. But these zombies were not just in the second order, they had clearly broken through some time ago, as their auras were extremely clear and firm. It was definitely not the aura of beings who had just broken through a barrier, and their bodies were adapting to the tremendous increase in soul power that had been being contained during the evolving process. Xietain opened his mouth to say something, but his eyes trembled slightly when he realized that not only could he not hear his voice, but he couldn't even hear any sound coming from outside, even though the normal zombies that were slowly crawling to cover the areas he had opened had their heads raised in his direction as their mouths moved. They were clearly letting out beastly growls and snarls, but he couldn't hear them. But this was not all. Xietan's biggest problem was that he couldn't even breathe. While it was possible for him to hold his breath for at least half an hour without any problem, the problem was that Xietain didn't have his lungs replenished with oxygen before he was caught, as it had all happened too suddenly, and he had been caught off guard while enduring the pain in his soul and body. The female zombie looked at the male zombie next to her and seemed to say something to her, as although Xietain couldn't hear her, he could see her mouth moving, and when Xietain saw the female zombie's mouth moving and read her lips, he was surprised and at the same time afraid. He was surprised because the language the female zombie was using was Chinese language. This meant that from the second order onwards, the zombies regained the ability to communicate at least to some extent. It was just that he didn't have time to be surprised, as the content he understood was enough for Xietain to realize that his life was in danger. Just as the male zombie held both hands to his head and a ripple of spiritual energy spread outward, Xietain called out to the little blue flame resting inside his body, "Little comrade, sorry to disturb, but I need your help." The endless blue lotus flame was weakened after using its full power one time in Oblong World, and a second time inside the Cosmic Gate. Although Xietain had given it 20 first-order soul stones and 2 second-order soul stones to devour, it seemed that the little blue flame would need a couple of days to be able to return to the battlefield at full power. It was precisely because of this that Xietain did not want to use the little blue flame's strength for hard and long fights, but in this circumstance, he really had no choice. He could not move his body, and his magical skills were too destructive to use in a situation like this. As for blood manipulation, Xietain's connection to the outside world seemed to have been partially broken, so he could not manipulate blood outside the air sphere, and the blood he kept in the storage pearl would serve no purpose other than to take up space here, as there was no room for a weapon to gain enough momentum to make a destructive attack. The little blue flame inside him danced tenderly despite the fatigue. One had to know that even though the endless blue lotus flame currently had barely basic intelligence and was in no way comparable to its past self, it was after all a living flame that could feel, and in the future, if it ever regained its former glory, it would be able to think for itself. So, it was not incorrect to say that the little blue flame had a soul of its own, a soul which was tremendously exhausted, and which needed rest to recover from the great battles it had undergone. After all, unlike the other living beings that could fight and absorb soul power from other beings to recover, the little blue flame could only rely on Xietain's soul power to keep it from dying out and the soul stones to gradually regain its strength. However, despite everything, the little blue flame ignored its own safety, and under the impetus of Xietain's soul, it burned fiercely. Bang! The blue flame spread throughout the interior of the air bubble, completely covering the inner view from the outside. Just as the strange spiritual wave released by the male zombie disappeared without a trace into the deepest parts of the horde of now 17 million zombies, the deep blue flames managed to completely intermingle with the air bubble that was containing Xietain's body. What happened when the fire was surrounded by strong capes of wind? Generally, the fire would be extinguished. However, it was different if the flame possessed power equal to or greater than the wind. Boom! At a height of over 600 meters, a thunderous explosion resounded so loudly that even the bridge more than half a kilometer below rumbled lightly. Some tiny-sized rocks broke off the edges and fell into the ocean 200 meters below, splashing and creating small ripples that were soon shaken by a larger ripple, created from the pressure generated by the explosion. Xietain grimaced as his body was sent flying backward, right into the horde of zombies waiting below him, eager to devour him. Although the flames of the endless blue lotus flame were unable to hurt Xietain, thanks to the soul contract that both existences shared, the power of the explosion was another matter. Just as a thin trickle of blood slipped out of the corner of Xietain's mouth, and at the same time as a bloody wound opened up on his forehead, he had no choice but to ignore the blood that partially began to fall on his left eye, as every hair on his body stood on end at the impending danger. "Blood shield!" Xietain hurriedly shouted as he invested 300 mana points. The liquid storage pearl immediately expelled large amounts of red blood, and in the blink of an eye that blood turned into a giant 6-layered shield. Boom, boom, boom. 3 explosions destroyed 4 of the 6 layers of shields, while the 5th and 6th were weakened by more than 70%, as the largest amount of blood evaporated before the power of the flames burning around the shield. Swoosh! A thin, almost invisible thread of transparent silk pierced through the blood shields that scattered in the wind, taking the flames with them into the sea. Like a hurricane of wind, Xietain activated the effect of his arachnid silk ring, and pulled hard on the thread, once the other end connected with one of the large columns that helped to support part of the weight of the bridge. His body changed course just in time to evade what appeared to be a huge fireball, and as he spun in midair, Xietain managed to see 4 big fat zombies with giant heads at the back of the horde. From one of the 4 fat zombies with balloon heads, Xietain noticed how the yellow flames danced in its mouth before going out. This had probably been the last zombie that had attacked. Although he could not be so sure, Xietain estimated that the 4 of them were level 49 or 50 zombies. Although they were still in the first order, the magic attack power of these 4 beasts was more than enough to hurt a second-order existence if they managed to land their attacks. These 4 zombies were completely different from the 20-plus first-order zombies that Xietain had killed so far. It was clear that they were some new type of creature or something that had evolved in a special path. This type of zombie was undoubtedly the enemy of any army, as their attacks were powerful enough to turn a vehicle into a pile of scrap metal. In fact, Xietain estimated after feeling the power of those huge fireballs that even the kings of the earth, the war tanks, would not be able to survive a hit from those. However, if there was one thing that greatly relieved Xietain, it was that once his body came into contact with the bridge, the fat zombies immediately stopped their attacks as they closed their mouths and stared at him as they tried to pass through the thousands of zombies that separated them without success. At least, it was clear that the zombies in charge were not letting the other zombies damage the bridge. After all, if the bridge fell, the zombies in charge would also fall into the water, and there they would be devoured sooner or later by the sea beasts, no matter how strong they were. Xietain's ice-cold gaze met the eyes brimming with murderous intent of the female zombie and the male zombie. Without stopping on ceremony, Xietain forcefully kicked the giant pillar, causing thin cracks to extend several meters as he flew straight towards the front of the bridge, where the two second-order zombies were waiting for him. The female zombie took a step forward as she saw the human before her aim at her battle partner. She held out both hands and quickly conjured a dozen wind globes, each over 5 meters in diameter, and with fierce wind blades around them. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. About 20 large globes charged with destructive wind energy flew at lightning speed towards Xietain, who was falling down and unable to avoid the attack. However, he did not panic at all, and instead used blood manipulation to form over 400 bloody whips. His body in attack position with the golden spear pointing at the two zombies was partially covered by several hundred blackish-colored whips that swung under his command and began to strike the 20 wind spheres. Bang, 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 bang. The whips formed from the rotting blood of the slain zombies hit more than 5 times each in the span of 2 seconds. The practically overlapping blasts served to destroy with great difficulty the elemental attack weapons the female zombie had used. However, Xietain's leather armor received several cuts in the process, as more than 24 wind blades lashed his body once the wind spheres were crushed. Suddenly, the black blood whip swayed in such a way that for a split second, Xietain disappeared from the line of sight of both second-order zombies. To the surprise of both zombies, the black blood whips soon seemed to lose all their power as they transformed into 400 cascades of blood that, when attracted by the planet's natural gravity, fell back onto the bridge, creating splashing sounds. Where? The hoarse and extremely annoying voice of the male zombie sounded from behind the female zombie. The female zombie did not respond and instead tried to find the human who had disappeared. She felt a bad premonition in her heart, and just as she turned around to look back, she saw a flash of golden light flashing behind her zombie partner. The male zombie's eyes widened, and a glint of disbelief shone in his golden pupils. The proud beast in command of 5 million zombies didn't even have time to make full use of his skills as his head flew through the air, while brown blood flew uncontrollably from his neck. You have received the soul power of second-order zombie commander Mo Chao level 67. The fierce gaze of the female zombie met Xietan's deadly gaze. The blood that covered his face earlier was nowhere to be seen anymore, and the wound on his head had healed without a trace. His hair was slightly tousled by the wind as the dark blood dripped, creating light clinking sounds as it fell to the ground from the blade of the golden spear in his right hand. Undoubtedly, even though his upper armor had received 3 cuts and his lower armor a couple more cuts in conjunction with his slightly cracked shoulder pads after being hit by the weakened magical attack of a second-order existence, Xietain looked like a true warrior who had fought and killed enemies all his life, and not like someone who 2 months ago studied to become a life-saving medic. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 523 Powerful Enemies. Xietain looked at the female zombie and suddenly sighed. This skill that allows me to teleport behind my enemies really is powerful. Even second-order zombies can take a single hit. Then, he didn't give the female zombie time to think as his body disappears before the eyes of the creature. The female zombie's red pupils constricted as she noticed the human that a second ago was in front of her disappear. In addition, she felt movement in the back of her body, so she hurriedly tried to turn around while conjuring a huge sphere of air and slamming it backward. However, soon the female zombie realized that something was wrong. Her nose twitched similar to that of a dog sniffing something, and the natural danger sense of a second-order zombie warned her of her approaching death. It all happened too fast, in a matter of 1 second. Therefore, when the female zombie tried to turn around, 2 black chains suddenly coiled fiercely around her limbs, blocking her movements effectively. How? The female zombie's eyes inadvertently moved to the ground, and her pupils fiercely twitched as she noticed that the black blood that had previously been used to form the whips that destroyed the air spheres had now crawled close enough that an enemy capable of controlling blood could launch a surprise attack. The blood chains only served to restrain the female zombie for a thousandth of a second. However, that millisecond in a melee battle was more than enough for a powerful warrior to claim the life of their enemy. Bang! The female zombie broke free and quickly turned around after discovering that she had been tricked. However, all she saw was a crimson red tip piercing right between her eyebrows before she could do anything else. Xietain looked coldly into the eyes of the female zombie that was looking at him with resentment even in the face of death. His body was slightly leaning forward with his right foot in front and left foot behind as he used both of his hands to hold onto the golden spear tightly. His two outstretched arms accompanied the stabbing motion of the spear, a spear which was surrounded by a bright crimson-red flame that added another shade of mystery to the legendary weapon. He said nothing and put more power into his thrust, causing annihilation of the falling sky to pierce the female zombie's head from side to side, and finally ending her life completely. You have received the soul power of Second-Order Zombie Commander Lang Yun level 71. Xietain ignored the message flashing in his retina, indicating that the life of his enemy had indeed been taken, and with a swift movement put away the female zombie's body, just as the corpse and head of the male zombie. He looked back at the zombie horde and noticed that there was indeed a noticeable change to go unnoticed. Previously, all the zombies were standing still, but when they noticed him, it was not only the zombies in the surrounding area that were advancing in his direction, but even those zombies that were more than a mile or two distant were trying to hunt him down. This was extremely uncommon since everyone knew after 2 months of the apocalypse that zombies did not chase zombies just like that. In short, even if a zombie noticed you, it did not mean that another zombie a meter away from the first one would also notice you, or that it would chase you, just because the first one noticed you. So, now that 2 zombie commanders had suddenly been killed by Xietain, the horde at the front of the zombie army stopped their movements of trying to chase him, since he was at a distance that should naturally be impossible for these normal zombies to be able to detect him. Really, the zombies are getting more and more dangerous. Xietain waved his spear and extinguished the crimson flame of his blood manipulation skill as he reasoned in a low voice. Although Xietain at his full strength should be able to defeat any second-order existence with relative ease, this Xietain could not defeat so easily on the bridge, since if he were to completely let go and stop restraining himself, the structure built with pre-apocalypse materials would definitely collapse. Therefore, to avoid trouble and to prevent as much as possible any kind of possible infection, Xietain used his fiercest attacks along with some cunning. First, he used blood manipulation to finish off the female zombie's magical attacks by exploding them before his body was even hit. Then, Xietain used the large number of blood whips to cover his body for a split of a second, and taking advantage of that small gap, he used Shadow Blink to teleport into the shadow of the male zombie. After killing the second-order male zombie with a swing of his spear, Xietain naturally managed to shock the female zombie greatly. It was here that Xietain had to play around a bit for his next move. Using Shadow Blink again was impossible as the skill had barely gone into cooldown at that time, so Xietain took advantage of the female zombie's shock and made her believe that he possessed a skill that teleported him to the back of his enemies. Xietain firmly believed that if the zombies had regained their ability to communicate and could give orders as he saw thanks to the movement of the male zombie, then he was sure that these zombies were definitely beings with some degree of intelligence, and along with intelligence, fear and doubt came hand in hand. His bet turned out to be correct. After planting the seed of fear and with doubt taking root in the female zombie's heart, when Xietain verbally tricked her before disappearing right in front of her eyes without giving her time to think, the second-order zombie reacted instinctively to protect herself and turned around to face the danger she believed was imminent. However, Xietain had naturally not teleported behind the female zombie. All he had done was activate the skill invisibility, thus creating the effect he had hoped to create. By the time the female zombie realized that she had been tricked thanks to her heightened senses that were not unlike those of a beast, Xietain had already made sure to restrain her for a brief moment, in order for him to grant the second-order zombie eternal rest. Really, it won't be easy. Xietain sighed as his eyes flashed coldly. There, deep within the horde, he could detect an aura even stronger than that of the 2 zombies he had just faced. It was a weak feeling that only appeared occasionally before disappearing without a trace. It was so ephemeral that Xietain even came to think it was an illusion. However, now he was sure that there was definitely something lurking there. Third order? Maybe. Xietain couldn't be sure considering that from the beginning, the Earth didn't seem to be behaving the way it was supposed to behave. Although Lilith had told him that it was not possible for a third-order existence to have appeared so fast, Xietain believed that she was wrong from the moment a first-order beast appeared less than a week after the apocalypse broke out at the university. Let's hope it's second-order max, because if it's a third-order zombie, my current self isn't confident of beating it 100%. Xietain shook his head and turned to leave. Blood bullets. Before he left, his voice floated in the air, and as if his words were the king's decree, blood became the herald that claimed the lives of over 10,000 zombies in a matter of seconds. From the back of the horde, two creatures watched as Xietain disappeared beyond the bridge, going into the thick and dangerous woodlands. One of them was tall, muscular, and instead of arms had tentacles. He had no hair on his head, and his skin was as white as paper with black veins well marked around his body. His red pupils exposed that he was definitely a zombie. "That human killed two of my commanders," said the tall zombie with two tentacles. His voice was clear and no different than that of a normal human. He looked at the creature next to him and said with some anger, "My battle power will drop by at least 10% now, if I want to keep control over these 17 million soldiers. Are you sure it's a good idea to fight here?" As for the other was a small ape about 5 feet tall, riding a caiman over 20 feet long over 2 feet tall. The little ape's eyes flashed with a hint of intelligence as it looked off into the distance before looking behind it and observing the beasts awaiting its command. The little ape looked at the zombie with two tentacles and said in a sharp voice, "That human, I've been following him for over a month now. He is not simple to be able to kill second-order beings, even while he is holding back, although he is only a first-order. Even you and I, were it not for finding that plant, could not be as powerful as we are now. If we are not careful, the ones who will fall could be us and not him." HMPH. The zombie with two tentacles snorted as an extremely long tongue darted out of its mouth, and it swung like a snake. "I want his brain." Kakiki the little ape gave a blood-curdling laugh, and as its eyes took on a deep golden hue, it said calmly, "Here, he'll have to restrain himself whether he likes it or not. In the meantime, we can fight to our heart's content. Even if we lose all these soldiers, that human's pure soul power will definitely be worth it. He'll die once that girl gives the order to her troops, while you and I will be able to leave without any problems, thanks to our prior agreement." The tentacled zombie said nothing and simply nodded. Still, anger was visible in his gaze as he looked off into the distance. Ugh. Xietain leaned against a tree while panting heavily. His handsome face occasionally distorted at the pain that came from deep inside him, but still he didn't allow himself to scream, so he could only grunt like a small wounded beast licking its wounds, silently waiting for the moment to attack. It had been 2 hours since he had decided to pause the assault on the bridge, and had gone into one of the forests. During that time, Xietain had done nothing but rest, avoiding moving as much as possible and letting his soul recover as quickly as possible. However, Xietain had greatly underestimated what a soul injury meant, and had overestimated what his health stat could do to his soul's condition. Now I understand, of course, my health stat represents the life of my soul. Since my soul is injured, expecting my health stat to fix things faster is stupid. Xietain sat down and took out a piece of fried chicken meat. In other words, now that his soul was injured, his health stat had indeed dropped. Not only had he lost around 66 health points until his soul fully recovered, but Xietain could also feel that the current him was indeed slightly weaker than before. It wasn't much, but weaker was weaker, and the pain that occasionally hit him didn't help in this kind of circumstance either. Xietain looked at the chicken meat in his hand, and began to eat in large bites without losing his breath. This chicken meat was precisely part of the giant eagle that Xietain had finished killing in Oblong World, the level 99 beast that had been mortally wounded by Shangyuan Bingshu, in exchange for her receiving an even worse wound. He devoured part of the beast's wing in a matter of minutes, and felt his soul recover slightly, as the soul power remaining inside the beast's body was absorbed and digested by his organism. You have received health plus 24. You have received stamina plus 24. You have received mana plus 24. The fact that Xietan's soul could no longer absorb soul power and was storing it during the evolution process had disadvantages. However, this also had its own advantages, and one of them was that since Xietain technically had not even gone up a level and his soul power was still the same, he could obtain stats by eating the meat of creatures far above his level and order. The giant eagle had been a second-order level 99 beast, while Xietain was only a first-order level 50 human. Therefore, the giant eagle's meat was a treasure to him. At least with this, I can regain a good portion of my temporarily lost power. Xietain wiped his mouth as he looked in the direction of one of the largest bridges in all of China with cold eyes. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 524 Fighting endlessly and slaughtering plus 6 million enemies. During the day, Xietain returned to the bridge after having rested until a little after 1 p.m. Although his soul was still wounded due to all the heavy modifications he was making over and over again without giving his soul time to rest, the irony of life also did not give Xietain time for him to rest and relax a little, while the deep wound in his very essence could heal. After all, Xietain needed to eliminate the zombies in the Eastern Dragon's Back as soon as possible, for the sake of opening a firm and direct path to the next district. In this kind of circumstance, resting was not allowed even for the wounded, and if one wanted to make progress, one needed to get out of bed, even if one had no legs to stand up. The reality of the past was cruel, not to mention this new reality that humanity was pushed into and forced to live in. Without using overlap regeneration at all to give his soul time to recover, the speed at which Xietain slaughtered the zombies naturally was in no way comparable to the past. Forget about killing 1.5 million zombies or 1 million zombies in an hour, the most he could do was kill a little over 300,000 for every hour that passed. Still, 300,000 zombies per hour was not bad at all. As for how Xietain managed to kill so many zombies in such a short time, even though he could no longer count on the second activation of the skill lightning movement to form 3 clones of himself, the answer was simple, dangerous, and naturally, Xietain was once again being cruel to himself. Maybe and just maybe, this last factor was the most crucial point why Xietain became so popular and appreciated by so many talented and powerful people in such a short time. Eastern Dragon's Back, 40 kilometers deep and 200 meters above sea level. 23:27 p.m. The night was almost completely dark, there were no stars in the sky, and only the faint silver shine of the moon dimly illuminated the surroundings. Growl. The bestial growls of the zombies, capable of sending shivers down the spine of even the bravest one, echoed together, creating a beast-like roar, and completely breaking the natural sound of the wind blowing from all 4 directions. In the midst of that chilling darkness crowded with terrifying creatures, a golden shadow continuously flashed through the small gaps that its attacks created amidst the seemingly endless army of zombies. Xietain swung his spear, completely ignoring the strong winds blowing from the sea, and swept all the zombies 5 meters in front of him. The zombies that were cut in half and survived crawled without any concern at all as they stretched out their hands in an attempt to catch him. However, by the time those zombies tried to enclose him, Xietain had long since left his previous position. He would sometimes move to the right, and after causing chaos in that area, he would hastily move to the left in order to slaughter the zombies that tried to close his path of retreat. No matter how hard the zombies tried, not even one of them managed to take a step beyond the perimeter that Xietain had established. He was just pressing down on an army of millions of zombies, while preventing any of them from crossing beyond, even though the width of the bridge was over 200 meters. No, Xietain was not only preventing the zombies from going any further, but he was even pushing the entire horde slowly backward. Even though every step forward was tremendously tedious, Xietain had managed to push the entire horde back 30 kilometers after an afternoon of killing. Even if at some point he was forced to retreat for superior reasons and the zombies reoccupied the position he had regained for mankind, Xietain would simply have to continue pushing until there were no zombies present. Putting aside the more than 3 million zombies he had slaughtered earlier, while fully exploiting the potential of overlap regeneration, which had damaged his soul, in these little more than 10 hours Xietain had managed to wipe out another 3 million zombies. Compared to killing 3 million in a span of 2.5 hours, to killing the same amount in over 10 hours was perhaps a bit too pitiful. However, there was nothing Xietain could do about it, and in fact, he was already pushing himself to achieve this result. Blood spears? The voice of Xietain was carried away by the strong sea winds, and as his hair danced wildly under the radiance of the moon, and his body stood firm against the bone-freezing cold of the night, the dark blood of the enemies he had just defeated floated up into the sky, creating a beautiful but at the same time frightening sight. Spending 100 mana points and proving that his control over his own skill had increased tremendously compared to 2 weeks ago, 5,000 blood spears of 3 meters each slowly descended until they were all only between 1 and 2 meters high from the bridge. Die? Xietain roared like an enraged lion, and at the same time as his golden spear beheaded another dozen zombies, the silver moonlight rays illuminated for an instant the steadfast black blood spears that at lightning speed flew out in a straight line one after another towards the zombie army. Bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang. The black-blooded spears became harvesters, claiming the lives of hundreds and hundreds of zombies in just a matter of a second, and soon breaking that number to 4 figures. However, the power of the blood manipulation skill was much more than that. Xietain, tired after fighting for so many hours without even a mere second of rest, and exploiting his agility almost to the limit on several occasions, shouted in a hoarse voice as he thrust the black spears as deep as he could into the endless sea of zombies at the site. The bodies of the zombies exploded like tomatoes being thrown against a concrete wall. Blood and pieces of broken organs flew everywhere along with bone fragments, falling to the ground and creating an extremely unpleasant pain jobber falling into the sea and becoming food for the unclassified creatures that dwelt beneath the deep, unknown waters. The green messages continued flashing one after another without stopping in Xietain's retina. These messages not only indicated the successful killing of a new zombie, but also showed that his probabilities of inflicting critical hits were not there just for show. More than 150,000 zombies were killed in just 10 seconds. A large patch that was previously filled by zombies and their staggering bodies had now opened up, leaving a straight path leading to even more and more zombies. Xietain's chest rose and fell as beads of sweat trickled down his face, despite the extremely cold temperature of the environment. Even someone like him who had seen many things over the past 2 months could not help but feel a tinge of despair, as in a matter of seconds, that large straight path that had been opened at the cost of 1/8 of his total mana was sealed off and occupied by more zombies. Soon, however, that feeling of being overwhelmed was swept away by the strong winds whipping through his body and drowned by the sea just below his feet. 6 million zombies on my first day of hunting and counting. Xietain tightened his grip on the spear in his right hand, and a steadfast sparkle flashed in his night-black eyes. If I continue fighting non-stop throughout the night, by dawn, I'll be able to eliminate another 3.5 million zombies more. That would be almost half of the total. It wasn't easy to get to this point. If he could unleash all his real strength and didn't have to restrain his skills, Xietain could simply cast 2 or 3 Crimson Blood Judgment and wipe out all the zombies, or he could simply use the fierce shockwaves caused by the explosions of his greatsword to slaughter thousands with each swing. But in this kind of situation, it really hadn't been easy to get this far. 6 million and counting. But Xietain did not stop and continued to fight. He had already launched large-scale attacks like the previous one 3 times, so his available mana currently stood at just over 500 points. Although he still had more than half of his total mana, Xietain did not dare to casually spend all of his mana. After all, if a powerful enemy appeared and he had no mana to activate his skills, then he would be forced to use overlap regeneration again, which could worsen the wound of his soul even more. 2 hours later, when midnight had passed, the war drums continued resonating as the battlefield became bloodier and more fierce with each second that passed. The face of Xietain could no longer be described as handsome at this point, and instead, his appearance was not unlike that of a demon such as parents used to scare misbehaving children. His black eyes were bloodshot after having fought and slaughtered so much, while his body began to move by instinct instead of waiting for the command from the brain. Annihilation of the falling sky turned into a weapon completely destined for slaughter in hands of Xietain, and every swing of this beautiful spear, as well as every stab, took care of claiming the lives of several enemies. Flashes of golden light glinted one after another in the middle of the night, as black blood mingled amidst the beautiful faint but clear light in the midst of such darkness. At the rear of the horde, hidden by the sea of zombies, the 2 true leaders of this entire area watched in surprise as events unfolded. How the hell does he not get tired? Does he have unlimited stamina like my soldiers? The zombie with 2 tentacles instead of arms bellowed in anger and confusion. His red eyes were about to spit flames due to the rage he felt as he watched his troops being slaughtered and quickly crushed by a mere human. Even he was no longer enjoying the privilege of possessing endless stamina, now that he had regained the ability to think. Along with evolution, there were many benefits, but for benefits to appear, there were often disadvantages that had to appear first, and in exchange for gaining the ability to think and reason, instead of continuing being a creature without a mind of his own. This zombie who led the zombie sea had to give up certain privileges that those without the ability to think or who were extremely slow enjoyed in return. After all, the soul record was a seemingly fair existence, and when it took something it gave something else in return, but the same applied in the opposite case. Impressive. The small ape ignored the rage of the zombie with two tentacles, and as it watched Xietain slaughtering zombies left and right, this creature that had been watching him and waiting for the moment to attack couldn't help but praise one of the humans it usually despised due to their clear weaknesses. But in fact, what neither of these two existences knew was that even for Xietain, it would not be possible to fight so many battles for a whole day without even taking a single second to rest. The only reason he was able to continue, apart from his own tenacity, was because he possessed skills that increased his overall power and thus also his ability to resist on the battlefield. Otherwise he would have collapsed by now or would have been forced to retreat to rest. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 525 Shangyuan Bingshu's Suspicion. The next morning, Xietain surveyed the scene before him as his red eyes tried to stay open to the bright sun that rose soundlessly on the distant horizon. Behind him lay countless corpses, smashed organs, pools of blood stretching as far as the eye could see. No matter where, every inch behind Xietan's body was like a hell where the dead went. More terrifying, however, was the scene before Xietan's eyes. The bodies of those who had not been able to withstand the change of organism after the arrival of the soul record were crawling on the ground, digging their fingers into the concrete, without caring whether their long fingernails split in the process or not. Those who still retained their legs and the ability to move their lower bodies staggered as they advanced step by step, stomping on those who crawled in the process and turning them into a pile of meat paste. The smell was extremely unpleasant, and at the beginning, even Xietain had had his moment of difficulty adjusting. However, fortunately or not, he had spent too many hours fighting on this bridge to get used to the rotten smell emanating from the zombie bodies and their organs scattered everywhere. It was currently past 10 o'clock in the morning, and Xietain had accomplished the goal he had set for himself. He had fought without any rest during the whole night. Added to the time he had fought before, Xietain had been fighting without rest for around 24 hours, even after subtracting the time he briefly stopped yesterday when his soul was injured. 9.400.000. Xietain said in a somewhat faded voice. The red veins stood out in his eyes, and the dark circles under his eyelids were irrefutable proof that spending a whole day battling had been hard even for a top-notch soul evolver like him. So much effort, but there are still more than half of zombies left, and among them, the toughest ones are hiding. Mental exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a great immovable mountain, slowly trying to force him to fall. His legs that didn't have any rest at all during all this time basically begged him to stop his steps for a moment, while his arms that had become like machines meant to accompany the movement of the golden spear were numb after so much war. Xietain had managed to clear almost half of all the zombies on the eastern dragon's back in one day and half of another and an entire night. It was an impressive achievement without a doubt. However, considering that the strongest zombies had yet to make their appearance, the real challenge had only just begun. The challenge had only just begun, and the enemy forces had barely taken any real damage, considering that their main troops were still relatively safe in the deepest lines. On the other hand, while the enemy was saving their forces, Xietain was getting more and more worn down. Xietain took out a chocolate bar from his storage ring and devoured it in 2 bites. Then, while he swinging his spear with one hand and decapitating the zombies that tried to lock him up, he pulled out a plastic bottle that was filled with a slightly greenish liquid before drinking the entire contents without hesitation. For the next 40 seconds, focus increases by 10%. After that, for 40 seconds, strength minus 40 points and agility minus 40 points. Using various mutant plants, the newly formed Magical Potions Investigation Team in support of the Botany Team managed to create a potion that, while far from perfect, Xietain appreciated very much. After using several prisoners who had committed different levels of serious crimes or prisoners of war, plotting against the current regime as guinea pigs, among whom more than 60% died in gruesome ways due to the side effects of some herbal mixtures, the Magical Potions Investigation Team managed to create this focus potion. The focus was an untraceable statistic, and neither Xietain nor anyone in his faction knew much about it. However, the effect of this newly created potion was remarkable in extended battles. Of course, few could afford the side effect that would hit after enjoying the benefits the potion had to offer. Xietain felt his mind become clearer by a considerable margin to the point where even his tired and sore eyes became quite relaxed. He lunged forward, taking advantage of the effect of the focus potion to the fullest, and continued slaughtering zombies left and right. There was no finesse at all in Xietan's movements. He was no different from a barbarian or a berserker from video games, that the more they fought, the more ferocious their moves became to the point where even their own lives ceased to matter after giving up defense. 40 seconds was a short period of time, and after slaughtering around 900 zombies, Xietain felt the muscles in his body weakening overall. His declining strength was most noticeable as the temporary loss of 40 agility points did not affect Xietain too much. After all, he had not used 100% of his agility at any time even until now. 5 hours later, Xietain had drunk around 100 focus potions and had finished off approximately 1 million zombies, 500,000 less than he was normally managing to kill within the same time limit. You have received the soul power of strength zombie level 22. You have received the soul power of speed zombie level 23. You have received the soul power of maniac zombie level 21. You have received the soul power of normal zombie level 24. At this point, every zombie that fell under Xietain's golden spear was a creature that had at least level 20. Many of them were level 24 and others more than level 25 in the process of evolution. Dealing with all these zombies naturally increased the difficulty level by several folds, as the variety of creatures that specialized in different areas attacking him at the same time caused Xietain could not afford to simply swing his spear carelessly for fear of receiving a scratch, while 90% of his body was protected by his armor and the rest of his defensive equipment. Xietain's neck, face, and the junction between each limb were unprotected, so he needed to keep those areas away from any possible zombie damage. 3 hours later, the night was descending once again. When this night came to an end with the rising of the sun, Xietain would have spent 2 full days and 2 full nights fighting tirelessly against the endless sea of zombies. That night, Xietain received a call from Xietain Bingshu. "How are your business?" she asked from the other side of the military radio with direct satellite connection. Although it was not possible to control the satellites since Xietain's faction had no control over his satellite station, the intercoms that were already connected directly to the satellites would continue to function smoothly until many years in the future, until the satellite station's backup power was completely cut off. Unlike normal cell phones that were connected to antennas, satellite radios were directly connected to the satellite instead of going through the hassle of needing an intermediary to get a signal. Therefore, despite being a few hundred kilometers from each other, communication between the radio at Baikwin Camp and the radio that Xietain carried on his body was smooth. "I guess not so easy, but somehow I'll manage," Xietain replied loudly as he continued slaughtering enemies. Blood splattered everywhere and the sound of corpses falling to the ground, along with the bestial grunts of the zombies, were clearly audible to Xietain Bingshu on the other end of the radio. "Are you fighting even now? It will become increasingly difficult to fight the zombies at night. You should retreat to rest," she said in a flat voice. Although her voice was indifferent, Xietain couldn't help but imagine her with a frown in the distance. Xietain was silent for a moment before he silenced the weariness in his voice and said in a clear voice, "Don't worry. I will be retiring soon." Xietain Bingshu was slow to respond this time. She seemed to be thinking about something. However, in the end, she simply said a short sentence, "That's fine then." "How are things on your side?" Xietain asked, trying to get some information regarding Baikwin Camp. "The migration from Beginning Village to Baikwin Camp began on the night of the same day you left," Xietain Bingshu replied. The relief in her voice was noticeable as she slowly explained. "Lu Xiaoyao managed to communicate very well with Yijin, and with the support of the Soul Evolvers and several armed troops, over 1,000 modified transport vehicles departed from the north. I assume that by tomorrow night at the latest or by dawn next day, they should be here as long as no unforeseen events happen." "That's good." Xietain gasped for a moment for air as he decapitated a first-order zombie. "As for me, I've managed to finish off quite a few zombies, but I still don't know how long it will take me to finish them all. I see it's normal considering that unless you want to destroy the bridge, you wouldn't be able to break loose completely," Xietain Bingshu replied. She believed that Xietain had killed maybe 2 million or 3 million zombies at most. However, she would never have expected that that number was far from being the true death count, because she would never have thought that Xietain would continue attacking without sleep for 2 days and 2 nights. "Bingshu, rest for today. I'm sure you've done a lot," Xietain suddenly said. "It's okay. If you need anything, feel free to contact the base. I will do my best to help you," Xietain Bingshu replied. "All right. Talk to you later." Xietain ended the communication immediately before he started panting slightly between each breath. The reason why he didn't tell Shangyun Bingshu that he had been fighting day and night without rest was because it would be difficult to explain how it was possible for him to have accomplished such a thing to begin with. On the other hand, he also did not need someone to feel sympathy for him, nor did he need to add weight on the slender shoulders of a woman who already tolerated too much in her life. Bai Zemin knew he was being stubborn, and that perhaps his path might not be the best. However, what human did not make mistakes? In his eyes, this was the best way to avoid trouble. Difficult? Yes, but not impossible. With his passive skills and titles that boosted his overall battle prowess, Bai Zemin was no different from a nearly inexhaustible machine. He could maintain this pace for at least another 2 days. Thus, while he forced a path south before the world evolved, Shangyun Bingshu and the rest could secure the base and consolidate the government. Bai Zemin believed that the best option was to leave the front to him, while the others made sure to protect the house behind. However, Bai Zemin was perhaps too mentally exhausted to remember that Shangyun Bingshu had not been the #1 student at Beijing University for nothing. She was not an empty beauty or talent, but her intelligence and ability to analyze were top-notch. Baikwin Camp. In one of the most luxurious rooms on the 3rd floor of the villa that formerly belonged to Mayor Bai Yong, Shangyun Bingshu was wearing a beautiful white dress as she gazed at the night sky. Her beautiful face had a slight frown on it that with the passing seconds deepened more and more as her blue eyes that shone as stars became more and more disturbed. She began to repeat her previous conversation with Bai Zemin, but the more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, as if an idea struck her, Shangyun Bingshu muttered under her breath, "Don't tell me." She was unwilling to believe it, and in fact, even if she wanted to believe it, accepting the thought that had just given birth in her heart became more and more plausible the more she thought and analyzed it. Shangyun Bingshu went to Wu Yijin's room and told her that she would be left in charge of the situation in case something happens during the night. "Bingshu, where are you going?" Wu Yijin was wearing pink pajamas, and her hair was damp. She was clearly getting ready for bed just before Shangyun Bingshu rushed into her room. "Don't worry, I'll be back by noon." Shangyun Bingshu didn't explain too much about it, and under the dumbfounded gaze of her good sister, jumped out of the window and floated like a butterfly. When her little feet touched the ground, she became a flash of silver light that in a matter of blinks disappeared from all eyes. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 526. Pillar of Fire rises skyward. In the middle of the sea of zombies, flanked by the most powerful creatures under their command, the 2-tentacled zombie and the little monkey riding the huge alligator observed for a couple more minutes as Bai Zemin unleashed a deluge of death on the zombies. It didn't matter if the last 2 commander zombies under the control of the 2-tentacled zombie sent countless unclassified zombies, or if they used zombies with different characteristic skills to try to overwhelm Bai Zemin. All of them were beheaded, or their bodies were torn apart in such a way that they had become powerless, even if they had miraculously managed to survive. "He's running out of steam," the monkey said in a high-pitched voice. Its eyes flashed with a glint of cunning as it said word by word, "His movements are becoming more and more predictable and less sharp than before. I think he might soon try to retreat. We must catch him just then." The 2-tentacled zombie narrowed his eyes and suddenly shook his head, confusing the little monkey. "That's not good." "Not good?" The intelligent monkey looked at the mutant zombie with surprise. As if it had thought of something, it asked, "Do you have a plan?" Although it was usually the smart monkey that came up with plans, this didn't mean that the tentacled zombie was dumb by any means. It was just that while the monkey kept its rational mind most of the time, the tentacled zombie simply crushed everything with brute force, different preferences. That human is strong, however, his fatal weakness is that he is alone. "On the other hand, we have armies backing us up," said the tentacled zombie in a deep voice. While looking at his soldiers, he slowly said, "There are over 10 million normal soldiers here, among which 3 million of them are mutant soldiers with skills or specialties. Apart from those 3 million of them, there are also 200 first-order soldiers and 2 second-order commanders." Taking advantage of the tentacled zombie pausing for a moment, the little monkey added, "Let's not forget that I brought with me 100 first-order and 3 second-order beasts. They are the most powerful powerhouses I could gather in over 5,000 kilometers to the north of the district. Not to mention..." Seeing the little monkey pointing down, the tentacled zombie nodded before slowly saying, "That human just conquered a human base, so his rule isn't that firm yet. That's probably why he's all alone here. Although I don't know why he's so eager to cross the bridge, let's use that to our advantage." "You mean..." "Right." The tentacled zombie nodded, and his red eyes flashed with vicious light as he said, "There's no need to wait any longer. That human definitely won't destroy the bridge. Let's send our most powerful warriors to take advantage of his weakness. We can play at our leisure at that time." The little monkey lowered its head and looked thoughtful. After more than a minute of silence, the beast raised its face and gave its response, "All right. But remember that if possible we must not destroy the bridge. Otherwise, we will lose contact with the south completely, unless we are willing to face others like us, as we seek another way through." After cutting off his call with Shangyu and Bingshu, not even 2 minutes passed when a change that Bai Zemin did not expect occurred. The horde of zombies that were tirelessly advancing like inexhaustible waves of the sea suddenly stopped their advance as a wave of mana charged with magical power spread out in all directions. Heh! Bai Zemin chuckled under his breath as his eyes filled with exhaustion narrowed. "So the Horde Lord finally can't continue tolerating the loss of so many zombies," he said quietly. "But that's good as well." Bai Zemin leaned his body forward with his left foot in front and his right foot slightly behind. Annihilation of the falling sky was brought behind his body by his right hand parallel to the ground. A deadly flash shone in his black eyes as he said coldly, "Now I can end this quicker than expected." His words had barely fallen when the horde of zombies slowly backed away, as they would have been sideways like the legend of Moses opening the seas. The first thing that came into Bai Zemin's line of sight was 3 beasts which were too conspicuous to be ignored. One of these beasts was a creature that crawled on the ground with an extension of over 400 meters long. Its body was surrounded by silvery scales that looked extremely beautiful under the moon's glare, and its emerald green eyes glowed viciously as they looked in his direction. But the most striking thing was that on its head was a single horn of approximately 30 centimeters that was beginning to grow. Although this creature was clearly a snake, the horn on its forehead made it look like a legendary flood dragon in the midst of growth. The second beast was a kind of dog, but calling a 4-meter-tall beast a dog was probably not too correct. Furthermore, this dog-like beast seemed to be covered in a coat of fire instead of fur, as its surroundings lit up brightly, and the heat around it even seemed to greatly displease the zombies that moved away as they growled. The third and final beast was an alligator that, while its height was not much compared to the heights of the 2 aforementioned beasts, its ferocity gave Bai Zemin special creepiness. The alligator's eyes glowed with almost human intelligence, and its jaw seemed to be powerful enough to tear a battle tank to pieces if not devour it whole. Although it looked simple, this alligator had a sturdy tail and extremely powerful legs that allowed it to move at great speed across the terrain. Bai Zemin's attention switched quickly to the 2 zombies walking among the beasts. 2 males, their appearances were not too striking, but the most striking thing would be that they did not look unpleasant to the eye when compared to the apparently decaying bodies of the normal zombies. Zombies and beasts? Bai Zemin frowned tightly as he suddenly felt that things might be a lot more complicated than he thought. Although he didn't want to believe it and found it hard to comprehend how such a thing could happen, the reality in front of his eyes was irrefutable proof that these 2 races that hated each other as much as humans hated them were in some sort of alliance. Regardless of how such a thing happened and regardless of whether the alliance was only temporary or not, it was indubitable that the weight on Bai Zemin's shoulders had suddenly shot up enormously to the point where his legs almost sank to the ground. 5 second-order existences. Counting the 2 commander zombies from before, that would be 7 of them. How can this even be possible? Earth is only in its first evolutionary stage, but there are already so many second-order existences among the other races? Bai Zemin was truly shocked in his heart. No. Wait a second. Suddenly, he seemed to realize something, and while carefully observing the 2 zombies and the 3 second-order beasts, Bai Zemin realized that although these beings were undoubtedly second-order enemies, the aura from their bodies was strange. Unfortunately, he failed to understand the reason, and the situation did not give him time to think too much either. Bang! The fire dog was the first to make a move. The creature stomped the ground in such a way that cracks spread 10 meters across the length and breadth of the bridge, and as the flames from its body shot skyward, small pieces of broken rock fell into the ocean 200 meters below. Bastard! Bai Zemin shouted angrily as he had not expected such a move at all. His anger boiled over as he saw the damage the bridge had received, even though he had been trying not to damage it all this time. Bai Zemin flew forward at lightning speed as he activated lightning movement. He burst out with all his movement speed, leaving none of his agility points untapped, and before the fire dog could even bark, he stabbed with his spear in an upward motion. Bai Zemin didn't even restrain his strength in this attack. Just as his spear and the beast's fire body were about to collide without the latter even noticing its enemy's approach, Bai Zemin silently triggered the second activation of his blood manipulation skill. Arriving just below the fire dog's body, Xietain activated gravity manipulation and reverse X 3 times, and jumped up nimbly. Crimson flames burned on the surface of his spear as he roared out at the top of his lungs. Die? Boom! A thunderous explosion rumbled in the middle of the night. The fire dog's body burst into a fiery blaze that was blown skyward by a fierce hurricane of wind that started with a small eye with annihilation of the falling sky as the center and expanded just like a huge funnel for every meter in height. Amidst the sea of zombies, the intelligent little monkey who was now using a balloon-headed zombie to be able to see what was happening in the distance as it had sent its mount to the battlefield, trembled as its furry face lit up brightly at the pillar of blazing fire, rising high in the sky, as if it were a pillar trying to defy the gods. "What a terrifying human," murmured the ape in shock. To think that he would actually find in such a short time a way to use 100% of his stats without having to fear for the bridge's destruction, truly impressive. On the other hand, while the shocked ape was praising Xietain from the bottom of its heart, the tentacled zombie had a dark expression on his face. "Looks like we were wrong," said the zombie in a serious voice. "If we don't head out ourselves, I'm afraid that human will continue to give us headaches despite being clearly exhausted." Xietain waved his spear and mitigated the flames dancing on the surface as a green message flashed in his retina. "You have received the soul power of second-order giant fire dog level 70. He looked at the 4 second-order existences that seemed to freeze after seeing his attack and snorted. Xietain pointed his spear to the front and arrogantly shouted, "For you monsters, even if I have to limit myself, I still have 1,000 ways to deal with each of you in an instant." Xietain might have to be careful, but this did not mean that he did not have his means. For the past 48+ hours, he had not only been swinging his spear or activating magical skills to slaughter zombies, Xietain had been racking his brain trying to think of different methods which could be of use in urgent moments. One of them was that, as long as his pure strength and attack power were enough to overwhelm his enemy at 200%, then he didn't have to fear destroying the bridge. All Xietain had to do was to push all his power into the sky so that every ounce of power would hit the clouds without disturbing the bridge beneath his feet. So what if they were second-order existences? The strongest of them possibly didn't even have 500 points in a stat. How could they be able to take on a Xietain with almost 1,000 total strength points and over 1,000 points of agility, thanks to his treasures? It was simply impossible. Now that he had devised several plans, even a third-order existence would have to suffer in a head-to-head against him if they wanted to damage the bridge in a confrontation. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 527. Human Leader, Zombie Leader, Beast Leader, Sea Princess. Fatal War, Part 1. Xietain dashed forward, exploding with a monster speed that a second-order existence should not possess, let alone a first-order existence like him. The snake with a horn on its forehead hadn't even managed to react when the heat of an approaching body glowed for an instant in its pupils. Out of pure instinct, the snake lashed out fiercely with its tail in an attempt to defend itself from what appeared to be an attack capable of taking its life. The swinging of a tail that measured over 300 meters in length was nothing to scoff at, as the wind exploded when the tail cut. More frightening, however, was the fact that the bridge was only 200 meters wide. Therefore, when the tail swung from behind to try to reach the front, the columns supporting the bridge were in the way. Blood barrier? Xietan's voice echoed in the middle of the night at the same time as a golden flash with crimson edges traced a straight line of over 100 meters in an instant. Boom! Xietan's attack, powered by crimson flame, directly smashed the giant snake's head without giving the beast time to show too much of itself. However, even though the creature had died, the previous attack was still in progress. Under the shocked gaze of the two leaders flanked by zombies and beasts, the giant snake's tail ferociously struck one of the upper columns of the eastern dragon's back. Boom! The bridge shook ferociously as if it were going to collapse at any moment, while thousands of zombies were sent flying into the sea as a result of the fierce shockwave. However, the bridge did not collapse. A thin but shiny layer of black blood illuminated the outline of the bridge 1 kilometer long and 200 meters wide. No one had noticed when, but at some point, the blood of nearly 10 million zombies had spread 10 kilometers across the length and width of the entire bridge without leaving even a spot uncovered. Perfect! Xietain couldn't hide his excitement as he laughed out loud, seeing another one of his plans working excellently again. to prevent the bridge from collapsing in case one of his attacks went wrong or in case his enemies attacked the bridge. Xietain had silently spread out much of the blood he had accumulated so far as his limits would allow. That way, if the situation was urgent, he only needed to boost the blood to form a magical and physical barrier capable of withstanding enemy attacks. What had left Xietain ecstatic, as well as the fact that he only consumed 20 mana points to have the snake's strike completely suppressed without letting the bridge suffer the consequences. In short, the physical attacks of a second-order existence wouldn't give the current him much trouble, thanks to his extremely high magic stat and high magic attack power, capable of bringing out the true power of the blood manipulation skill. Xietain rushed without delay towards his next target, one of the two zombie commanders. The zombie commander did not stand around waiting for death, as from the first second the human disappeared, the beast immediately sent a mental command to the zombies, with special characteristics waiting near him. Xietain was forced to stop his charge when 4 giant fireballs flew in his direction. He stomped the ground beneath his feet with vigor and leaped skyward in a hurry as the 4 large fireballs completely covered the 200-meter-wide bridge. Boom, 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 boom. The terrifying explosions of the 4 powerful magical attacks shook the bridge fiercely, and waves over 200 meters high rose into the sky. Forms of marine life were dragged down as a result of the fierce battle on top of the bridge, and soon the scene turned into a slaughterhouse. 1-meter-tall, 3-meter-long fish with small legs crawled along the ground in a manner similar to a 100-footer. Their teeth were extremely sharp as they began to attack the zombies on the bridge, devouring their bodies and becoming more powerful. There were even 3 lobsters 5 meters tall and over 50 meters long, with first-order auras emanating from their bodies turned into harbingers of death. Its tongues were like harvesters claiming the lives of the zombies, and even a first-order zombie was cut in 2 halves by it. But the zombies were not idle either, for when they sensed the arrival of sea life they also became excited. Those that were still standing slowly staggered while grunting. Every time they encountered a fish, they quickly began to viciously bite its body, while those that had lost their lower bodies crawled to viciously scratch their enemies. The mutant fish were far fewer in number, but despite this and the fact that they were out of their natural environment, the fish were actually giving the zombies a good fight, as their bodies were surrounded by some sort of viscous liquid that made it difficult for zombies below level 15 to break through their defenses. Kill it! The other zombie commander raged as he watched a first-order mutant lobster massacring his subordinates, so he pointed his hand and sent an order directly to the fat balloon-headed zombies. One of them opened its mouth wide, and a glowing magic circle appeared inside its maw. A second later, and without much build-up, a fireball over 50 meters in diameter flew towards the mutant lobster that was unleashing hell among the zombie army. Boom! The bridge shook fiercely again, and several tiny stones broke loose to fall and be lost forever in the deep sea. Fortunately, the magic blood barrier that Xietain had prepared once again withstood the attack at the cost of another 20 mana points. Having jumped off the bridge and still in full ascent, Xietain watched the scene below with fierce eyes. His gaze flashed across the battlefield until he finally found his target and pointed his finger as he said in a low voice, "Blood spike." The mutant lobster staggered back and roared in pain as one of its limbs was sent flying. Blood trickled down the creature's broken carapace, and its gaze automatically darted to the balloon-headed zombie that had just attacked it, to only find that that same zombie was preparing a second imminent attack. Swoosh! Just as the balloon-headed zombie was about to launch its attack, a black stake rose from the blood-covered ground and pierced the back of its head without warning. Its brain was crushed and bashed as its skull split into 2 halves. You have received the soul power of First-Order Destroyer Zombie level 42. As the green letters flashed in Xietan's retina, the Destroyer Zombie fell heavily onto the ground. The mutant lobster did not stop to thank Xietain, as the sea beast immediately began to slaughter more zombies with a new rage born in its core. Just as Xietain began to descend, his danger sense skill suddenly activated to the maximum extent possible, and all the hairs on his body stood up, cat-like warning of impending danger. Swoosh! Xietan's black pupils reflected as a 2-meter-tall slender creature appeared right above him a little over 10 meters away. As Xietain descended due to gravity, the ball creature, whose skin was as white as paper and whose face was covered with black veins and strange patterns, ascended as proof that it had jumped after Xietain. Time seemed to slow down for an instant to Xietain, and his eyes trembled as he noticed how the strange zombie that was staring at him with burning anger slowly opened its mouth full of extremely sharp animal-like teeth. Xietain gritted his teeth and out of pure instinct shouted, "Gravity manipulation X15." The tentacled zombie opened his mouth as wide as no normal human would be able to do, and an extremely hoarse and powerful voice came from inside him, thunderous stun roar. Boom! A shockwave sent a sound wave in Xietain's direction, flying at a speed that even he could not match. However, just as his body was about to be hit, the gravitational law surrounding him increased tremendously to the point where he was dragged down like a comet passing through the world's atmosphere. The sound wave traveled more than 5 kilometers before it impacted powerfully on the distant sea, raising more and more waves that ended up attracting more and more sea beasts that soon began to join the fray. Red blood began to pour from inside Xietan's ears as his eyes dimmed for a brief moment. His mind went blank for a split of a second at the powerful thunderous stun roar of the tentacled zombie, and by the time he recovered, he cursed the zombie in his heart. How was that a stunning roar? If that attack from before hit him, Xietain would have to thank all his ancestors if he didn't lose part of his body. Fortunately for him, it seemed that the tentacled zombie's thunderous stun roar had its own cons, as after that attack, the zombie was briefly stunned, as the gravity of the world slowly dragged him down. Unfortunately for him, the tentacled zombie was not the only enemy that was waiting for the optimal moment to attack Xietain. While the tentacled zombie had decided that the best time to attack was when his enemy was in the middle of the air and could not move freely, since his agility stat had been temporarily sealed, the cunning little ape decided that the best time to attack was right after Xietain had been attacked in mid-flight. Xietain felt again that death would be upon him, and as his body plummeted towards the bridge, he turned to look down as he got ready. There, he watched as a relatively small creature just over 5 feet tall looked up at him with glowing eyes. Xietain could even swear he saw a smile on the animal's face. However, his pupils soon twitched fiercely as he watched the ape open its mouth wide, and the surrounding wind instantly gathered in its lungs. With its body swollen like a balloon, the ape that now had its mouth closed and its cheeks puffed out opened its mouth. Roar! A roar that should not come from the mouth of an ape broke completely in the middle of the night, and under Xietan's astonished eyes, a wind hurricane of more than 1 kilometer in diameter shot up into the sky, straight towards him. If one were to look from afar at the current scene, one could see a huge wind tunnel rising towards the clouds that were slowly beginning to obscure the sky right in the middle of the bridge that stood in the middle of nowhere. Damn! Xietain cursed aloud as he realized he didn't even have time to do anything but cross his arms in front of him, and that he did a split second before his body was swallowed up by the ferocious whirlwind. Xietain was engulfed by the ferocious enemy magic attack, and the wind blades whipped his body in staggering quantities. In just a matter of 1 or 2 seconds, over 20,000 wind blades had sliced through his body. Were it not for the fact that this was a rather scattered magical attack due to its magnitude, and were it not for Xietan's defensive equipment, as well as his own silver skin, his body could have been cut into thousands of tiny pieces. Xietan's mind raced faster than a racing car as he carefully thought of what to do, and while all this was happening, his body was being dragged back and forth as more and more bloody wounds of irrelevant size began to appear on his body as a result of the endless wind blades. Blood manipulation? Xietain could surround himself in a giant blood armor sphere. However, this was not a viable long-term option, as he could not stay in a turtle shell forever. Gravity manipulation? Unfortunately, the power of the enemy's magical attack was powerful enough to send Xietan's body flying, even though he was falling from over 1,000 meters high, with the Earth's natural gravity boosted x15. Therefore, it did not seem to be possible either. Shadow blink? Xietain could not see any shadows at this point. In fact, except for thick white walls created by the enormous buildup of wind, he could see nothing. In the end, Xietain could only find one method, the simplest and craziest way to do things. The air in his lungs began to be stolen due to the pressure he was experiencing, and as he closed his eyes and kept his mouth tightly sealed to avoid serious injury, Xietain reached forward and pulled something out of his storage ring. It was his greatsword, his main weapon. Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words. Xietain clutched his weapon with both hands and let himself be swept away by the wind. His body began to spin wildly to accompany the movement of the windstorm around him until he reached a point where his body was a mere blur. Taking advantage of that fierce momentum when the wind hurricane seemed to want to change its course, Xietain viciously struck the wind wall without holding back in the slightest. Boom! The fierce windstorm was completely broken when an explosion that shook the ocean 3,000 meters below carried with it a huge shock wave in the shape of a giant hoop and swept away the clouds that were beginning to gather in the sky. Waves over 600 meters high rose into the sky and battered the bridge in such a way that over 2 million zombies were swept into the deep ocean, and more sea creatures began to take up their positions. In the sky, after hitting with over 900 strength points, Xietain watched as for a split second a thin, tiny space crack formed, and soon disappeared without a trace. This surprised him tremendously, as he was confident that an attack with his greatsword would definitely damage the Earth's space barrier. However, Xietain soon realized that with Earth's evolution around the corner, his attacks would soon not be as dangerous to the world as they were at present. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 528. Human Leader, Zombie Leader, Beast Leader, Sea Princess, Fatal War, Part 2. As Xietain used his blood manipulation skill in order to control his injuries and assist the natural healing of his body in such a way that at a glance the superficial cuts made by the windstorm that had enveloped him were beginning to fade, he took the chance of shock that his previous attack had caused on his enemies to think carefully about what to do next. After all, the fact that the Earth had now become strong enough to withstand an attack from his rank 3 greatsword with 10,000 physical attack points had opened a new door for Xietain. However, with his mind racing at full speed, Xietain decided that unless it was really urgent and necessary like a moment ago, he should not use Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words. After all, in Xietan's memory, what had happened in Oblong World and the invasion of the Asura race was still fresh. Although he couldn't be sure that one of the causes of the Asura invasion was the spatial crack that inadvertently opened for a couple of minutes, when he used his Void Fist for the first time, Xietain felt that these two events were somehow interconnected with each other. Suddenly, Xietain sensed danger, and as he looked below him, he noticed that the zombie from before had leaped into the sky in pursuit. Xietan's eyes flashed with a fierce light as he perceived the tentacled zombie's murderous intent. He fashioned a platform of blood beneath his feet, and with a swift motion kicked with every point of strength to fly downwards, straight towards the zombie in full ascent. Crimson Flame? Gravity Manipulation X15. Xietain immediately set off the second activation of blood manipulation, before increasing the gravity around him X15 times its natural. For the first time, Xietain achieved the unthinkable. The tentacled zombie extended both limbs forward and strange poisonous spines extended from each tentacle as he lashed upward with ferocity. However, the beast suddenly noticed that his enemy's body seemed to disappear. Danger! The tentacled zombie realized that his enemy had moved too fast, and just then an explosion shook the sky as a clear white line straight down towards the ground appeared in the middle of the night. It was just that by the time the tentacled zombie sensed danger, it was already a little too late to react. This was because Xietain had managed to break the sound barrier. Using over 900 strength points after kicking the blood platform, gravity manipulation X15, the momentum of falling from over 3,000 meters high, and last but not least with the golden spear in front of him cutting the wind obstructing his advance in two halves, Xietain had managed to break the sound barrier that had become tremendously powerful due to the evolution of the world. The tentacled zombie felt overwhelming pain in the chest area, and when he looked down his pupils twitched fiercely. A hole big enough for a person to pass through headfirst had opened up from his abdomen to his chest. All the internal organs had disappeared without a trace, as dark blood gushed out from within. Xietain turned around at the same time as he activated gravity manipulation and reversed to its maximum extent. That beast really didn't die? He gritted his teeth at not receiving a message indicating the gaining of enemy soul power. Knowing that the tentacled zombie was severely damaged due to his previous attack, Xietain decided to take the bull by the horns, and unwilling to let go of such an opportunity, he prepared to throw his spear. However, just as Xietain was aiming at the zombie's head, he perceived mortal danger, therefore he had no choice but to turn his body around again, and stab fiercely with his spear downwards. Boom! Xietan's attack was met with a blue lightning flash over 1 meter wide and over 1,500 meters long. On the bridge, the little ape had its mouth wide open as it roared a huge lightning piler into the sky. From a distance, one could watch in terror as in the middle of the starless night the lightning spread everywhere in a disorderly fashion, with a large blue column, impacting against an object that was simply too small in comparison. Bang! 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 The seas grew rougher and rougher, and as if the god of the sea had become enraged, waves over 700 meters high rose up and began to lash the bridge indiscriminately. Rumble? In the middle of the nothingness, the bridge rumbled as the dark blood glowed in an attempt to hold it steady, without letting it collapse. Xiemin's downfall had been interrupted by the fierce magical attack of the short ape, and in mid-flight he found himself fighting the powerful lightning that was trying to break beyond his spear to strike his body. He gritted his teeth trying to keep the magic from coming forward, as the consequences would be dire, but just then Xiemin seemed to receive some kind of enlightenment. Unbeknownst to him due to the heat of the moment and the mortal danger he was in, something sleeping deep in his soul lit up for a moment. During that brief instant, the gas that represented his soul was tinged crimson with flickering jet-black flashes. Scram! Xiemin roared, and as if he had done it 1,000 times he swung his spear in a strange motion, striking a certain part of the enemy's magic attack. Boom! What? The little ape on the bridge cried out in a high-pitched voice, as it witnessed its magic lightning being slashed and crushed, as if a giant had squashed an ant. Blue flickering snakes lit up the sky 10 kilometers around with the aerial battlefield, as the center and the seas shimmered at the electricity spreading through the atmosphere. You have learned. Xiemin removed the messages from his retina in irritation, and soon his feet were back on the bridge. He dashed forward furiously as he glared at the little ape with eyes brimming with murderous intent. The intelligent little beast was too dazed by what had just happened, as its elemental skills were one thing it was most proud of, aside from its high intelligence and reasoning ability. Therefore, by the time Xiemin stabbed with his spear towards the small ape's head, the latter had lost its chance to dodge the attack or respond accordingly. Unfortunately for Xiemin, this was not a fair 1-versus-1 battle. Roar! The alligator, and the only second-order beast among those that had appeared earlier that's still alive, roared at the sight of its master in danger. With no other choice, the beast ferociously swung its tail forward. The wind exploded at the pressure exerted by the power behind the whip-like movement of the giant tail that moved at lightning speed, and before Xiemin's spear reached the intended target, the little ape's body was sent flying to the side, as if a giant truck had hit a rag doll. The little ape coughed up several mouthfuls of fresh blood as its body flew and fell towards the sea, sinking into the deep water. Damn lizard! I should have killed you first. Xiemin snorted, and his eyes seemed to spit fire as he charged towards the alligator. This beast definitely had a very high level. Its intelligence was even enough to judge that Xiemin would not abandon his previous attack, even if it meant he had to receive the alligator's attack with his physical body. It was precisely for this reason that the alligator decided to strike the little ape's body and help it in this way to avoid death. However, the alligator completely ignored Xiemin, as in a couple of leaps and agile movements, the creature jumped off the bridge and plunged into the raging sea. All this happened in a matter of only 2 or 3 seconds at most, so when Xiemin saw the beast disappear into the bottom of the sea, all he could do was temporarily give up and focus on other enemies. After all, even he did not dare to bravely jump into the sea. It would be no different than courting death. Xiemin had no time to worry about the short ape, capable of launching powerful magical attacks that had escaped his spear, nor did he have time to feel anger towards the alligator that had caused one of his greatest opportunities to go to waste, as immediately his danger sense skill again warned him that staying in that place would lead to him suffering severe damage. Xiemin saw out of the corner of his eye 3 spheres of fire over 50 meters in diameter flying in his direction, and he didn't have to think too hard to realize that these were the attacks of the destroyer zombies, like the one he had killed before. However, he didn't dodge this time. Ha! Xiemin shouted as he slashed with his spear at lightning speed. The golden spear under his control left overlapping images in the sky as they connected with the fire magic attacks, and just like with the pillar of lightning from before, the 3 spheres dispersed after 3 powerful explosions that turned over 200 zombies and over 400 sea creatures into mortal debris. Swoosh! In the next instant, Xiemin sensed imminent danger, one that was completely different from the one he had just sensed from the fire spheres. He did not dare to take the oncoming attack casually, so knowing that he would not have time to turn his body and slash with his spear, he simply spun and used that momentum to strike with his left fist forward. Boom! Under Xiemin's shocked eyes, the tentacled zombie that had just been severely wounded 4 or 5 seconds ago was now standing before him, staring at him with red eyes that were filled with burning rage. Rumble? The bridge rumbled again, but this time with more ferocity than before, and even though Xiemin had just spent 50 mana points for his blood barrier to withstand practically all of the resulting impact, that little was enough for a large rock more than 5 meters wide to break off from a part of the bridge and fall into the ocean, raising another large wave in the process, which joined a 2,000 meters high water tube that rose into the sky surrounding Xiemin and the tentacled zombie. The tentacled zombie was forced to move back more than 20 meters as his feet dragged backward, while Xiemin was forced to move back a bit more than 10 meters. The tentacled zombie was shocked to the bone. This was the first time he had been defeated not once but twice in a direct confrontation, and by a first-order existence at that. On the other hand, Xietain was also shocked as he looked at the creature before him. The tentacled zombie that should have a mortal wound on his body and at the very least should be agonizing on the ground taking his last breaths, was actually standing alive and strong enough to force him back, despite having over 900 strength points and gauntlets, with over 1,000 points of physical attack power. The most surprising thing was that even though one of the tentacles that the zombie had as arms was missing, the deadly wound that Xietain had inflicted on him earlier, which had practically made his upper body disappear, was no longer there. While all this was going on, in the distance, a beautiful woman wearing light leather armor and a sky-blue sword was getting closer and closer to the bridge. She was Xietain Bingshu, who had been talking with Xietain 10 minutes ago, but due to her apprehension and suspicion, decided to go and check some matters for herself. Boom! A thunderous explosion coming from the distance caused the expression on Xietain Bingshu's beautiful face to change noticeably, and she did not hesitate to activate lightning movement to increase her movement speed tremendously. Fuck! Xietain Bingshu gritted her teeth, and even with her good manners, she couldn't help but curse under her breath. She had just arrived at the edge of the giant bridge, but all she could see there were shattered corpses and blood. There was no sign of Xietain or any other zombies present. Boom! A terrifying explosion traveled over 40 kilometers, reaching the northern edge of the bridge and reaching Xietain Bingshu's ears. She looked ahead, and under her worried eyes, huge waves rose into the sky before falling heavily again. Practically the entire area was in a mess. Even the nearest forests had been torn apart by the giant tsunamis that swept over the land as a result of the fierce battle that was raging in the middle of the sea. Xietain Bingshu did not even stop to think about her own safety. She did not need to think about who the person fighting in the distance was, and precisely for that reason, she did not hesitate to charge towards the bridge like a whirlwind of icy wind, disappearing in a matter of seconds from the area she was in. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 529. Human Leader, Zombie Leader, Beast Leader, Sea Princess. Fatal War, Part 3. Back to the bridge. Xietain was the first to react, as without giving the zombie leader time to respond, he rushed forward at lightning speed, closing the distance of just over 30 meters in an instant. Swoosh! His golden spear transformed into a flash of bright light piercing towards the zombie's head. However, the creature was by no means one to be dealt with easily. Human, I will definitely eat your flesh and will drink your blood, the lead zombie roared and slammed forward with his right tentacle. Boom! The beast's tentacles seemed to be made of metal and not flesh or any other substance, since when annihilation of the falling sky met the zombie's thorn-filled weapon, it transmitted a slight numb feeling to Xietan's hands. Boom! 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 Xietain did not respond to the leading zombie's threat, and instead continued pressing fiercely forward. His golden spear was like a ferocious hurricane hitting the leading zombie, and passively forcing him back slowly as the explosions became more and more violent. Both exchanged blows in an attempt to take the life of the other, and in just 1 second, both had attacked at least 500 times. The lead zombie immediately tensed up as he used his one tentacle to try to keep Xietan's fierce attacks at bay. However, more and more bloody injuries of varying depths began to plague his body. Rumble? The bridge suddenly shook with a loud rumble, and this brought Xietain out of his raging state, in which it didn't look like he would rest until he saw his enemy's head rolling on the ground. Blood chains? He shouted out loud. The zombie leader immediately used another strange skill, and his body was surrounded by purple thorns. However, something surprising happened. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Far from being blood chains, what came out from the ground were hundreds of giant spikes that pierced into the body of the leading zombie under Xietan's control. The leading zombie realized that the human before him had tricked him, and to avoid major problems, he simply stomped on the blood barrier he was standing on and jumped with all his power into the sky. It was clear that the fierce battle and deadly attacks that Xietain was launching non-stop had silently told the zombie leader that even though his enemy was a first-order existence, his actual combat power was something that even he needed to fear. Even though the zombie leader only had to scratch Xietain to win, if his attacks didn't reach their target it was of no use. Xietan's gaze was as cold as ice. He did not know the reason, but he was in a state where both his mind and body seemed to be in sync in such a way that his movements had become more refined than before. Xietain kicked the ground and flew in pursuit of the zombie leader. His strength stat was clearly superior as despite jumping later, he still caught up with the intelligent creature in a matter of a second. Their gazes met for an instant just as they crossed, and at that moment the zombie leader opened his mouth wide. Xietain noticed how the creature's throat moved strangely and again felt a flash of illumination hitting him. A simple but at the same time ridiculous idea that not many would think of crossed his mind, and in a state of total calm, he decided to put it into practice, even though he was in the middle of combat. Both the zombie leader and Xietain opened their mouths and then, at an altitude of over 2,000 meters, they both let the air out of their lungs while staring at each other. Roar! Roar! Two fierce roars shook the timpani of the zombies, beasts, and sea creatures that were clashing fiercely on the bridge. The sound waves met in midair and exploded like bombs, sending the bodies of Xietain and the zombie leader flying several meters backward, as the Earth's gravity pulled them back down. "You have learned." Again, Xietain removed the message from his retina for later inspection, and by looking down for an instant, he was able to get a wide view of the battlefield. The war on the bridge was getting fiercer and fiercer with each passing second. The zombies and beasts seemed to be working as a team, while the sea creatures were under no one's leadership, so not only were they killing zombies and beasts, but they were also killing their own kind when one got in the way of the other. A strange creature standing on 2 feet similar to a human, but with a shark head and shark torso, was engaged in a death fight against the 2 zombie commanders, who despite having the numerical advantage in reality, barely had any advantage over the second-order sea creature. The shark man did not fear like the humans feared the infection of the wild mana that dwelt within the zombies. Therefore, the sea creature with its physical superiority and water skills managed to fight against 2 second-order existences, despite receiving increasingly severe injuries as time went on. Xietain saw that even though the zombies and beasts overwhelmed the sea creatures with their numbers at an approximate 5:1 ratio, gradually things began to balance out more and more as the zombies were washed away by the resulting waves from the main battlefields, and as more and more sea creatures jumped onto the Eastern Dragon's back. Just at that moment, a mind wave was released by the zombie leader that also plummeted towards the bridge, and then 3 giant fireballs flew in a straight line towards Xietain. However, that was not all, as immediately after that Xietain was also assaulted by the attacks of other first-order zombies. Wind blades, earth spades, ice cones, lightning balls, and more. Although these attacks were not as powerful as the attacks of the 3 destroyer zombies that remained alive, they could by no means be ignored. In full flight, it was naturally impossible for Xietain to dodge so many attacks focused on a single point, just as he planned to use gravity manipulation to increase his falling speed to evade as many elemental attacks as possible, as well as activate blood manipulation to erect shields in front of him. Another change happened. Blizzard, an extremely beautiful voice like the song of angels but also chilling just like the whisper of a demon, broke out amidst the war cries and bestial growls. Xietain noticed out of the corner of his eye that 1,000 meters below him, running from the northern area of the bridge, the silver moonshines entered in sync with the platinum white hair of an incredibly beautiful woman, running at lightning speed into the battlefield. His eyes widened in shock as this beautiful woman brandished that sword with which he was extremely familiar towards the sky, and on the surface of the sword, 3 light blue magic circles lit up. Swoosh! The frost energy burst powerfully outward from the magic circles on the blade, and the fierce but beautiful swing of the sword pushed all that frost energy into the sky. With a huge range, the frost energy quickly turned into a fierce blizzard that soared over 2,000 meters high and traveled for another 1,000 meters in a straight line towards the bridge in a southerly direction. Crack, 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 crack! Wherever the blizzard passed, everything froze. The air particles were no exception as a thin layer of frost formed in the middle of the empty space, but the most chilling thing was that when the blizzard came face to face with the magical attacks that were heading towards Xietain, they were completely frozen to the point where even the giant fire spheres that the 3 destroyer zombies had cast were completely frozen in mid-air. Bang, 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 bang. All of the elemental attacks exploded in midair after being frozen, and tiny fragments of ice slowly fell from the sky, scattering in all directions and creating a beautiful sight that was witnessed by the moonlight. Furthermore, regardless of whether they were scary zombies, beasts several meters tall, or strange-looking sea creatures, all living things within a range of 1,000 meters in a straight line were affected by the effect of the blizzard. The first-order existences lost over 60% movement speed as a thin layer of frost formed on their bodies, and although they were doing their best to shake it, it was clear that it would take them some time to achieve it. As for those unclassified existences, all of them, regardless of race, were frozen to death. Bai Zemin's feet touched the bridge again, and, like all those with some intelligence, he glared at the platinum-haired woman approaching with delicate steps. Bingshu? He said in astonishment. It was clear that he hadn't expected to see Shangyuan Bingshu here when 5 to 10 minutes ago she was at Baekwon camp. The moonlight fell on her, and Bai Zemin was forced to admit that leaving aside a higher existence and even a succubus whose charm was simply colossal like Lilith, Shangyuan Bingshu was by far the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Even the beautiful and sexy third-order Glenera he killed in Oblong world could not compare. However, the expression on the face of Shangyuan Bingshu said that she wasn't very happy at the moment. Her usually ice-cold eyes had transformed into the embodiment of volcanoes, as they seemed to be about to erupt and spit out burning lava. Moreover, it was clear from the line of her delicate jaw that she was clenching her teeth hard enough to snap them. How could Bai Zemin not understand the reason behind her anger? He forced a smile into his heart, but just when he thought she was going to say something or complain, Shangyuan Bingshu said a thing that surprised him one more time. You take care of that zombie over there. Leave the rest to me, I'll see to it that the small ones don't bother you. Bai Zemin looked at her in awe before a flash of appreciation passed through his black eyes. You really are a great woman, he said from the bottom of his heart as he clenched his spear tightly and fixed his eyes on the zombie leader, who seemed to be giving orders, as he waited for his missing tentacle to grow to speeds visible to the naked eye. Shangyuan Bingshu raised her slender hand and tidied a strand of hair behind her ear as she casually said, It's good that you know. Bai Zemin chuckled before his expression grew cold. Then, I'll talk to you later. Just as he charged towards the zombie leader to pick things up where they left off, he heard, Be careful. Bai Zemin nodded imperceptibly and soon entered into fierce combat against the zombie leader. Shangyuan Bingshu watched with narrowed eyes the battle between what in her eyes were two monsters out of their current league. Although she could not follow every move the leading zombie and Bai Zemin made, as she mostly saw flashes of golden light and flashes of ominous-looking purple lights. The fact that the powerful zombie was backing away again and again, while Bai Zemin was advancing more and more ferociously, left it exposed who had the upper hand in hand-to-hand battle. Seeing that all seemed to be well now and feeling relatively more relieved, Shangyuan Bingshu faced the battlefield that belonged to her and silently cherished the beautiful crown that adorned her hair. The crown was mostly a jewel in the shape of a lily flower, with a teardrop-shaped sapphire which fell silently and rested in the center of her forehead. The lily flower with the sapphire was held in place by two large, deep blue rose-shaped clips, roses which were held by the sides of her hair, just at both sides of her forehead. Two braided chains linked the lily flower to each rose at both ends, and in the light of the rising moon, and matching Shangyuan Bingshu's silver hair, made her look like a true goddess. This was the treasure she had received from the Soul Record as a reward for having partially completed part of the quest under the name Destroyer of Destroyers, after she and Bai Zemin invaded Oblong world, and discovered that the races there had committed taboo. This was an epic grade treasure, however, it was a treasure that barely bordered on legend grade. Although it was a big difference compared to Bai Zemin's storage ring, the Soul Record had also given Shangyuan Bingshu what she needed the most, just like it did with Bai Zemin. The name of the treasure was Elf Queen's Frozen Pride, Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 530 Human Leader, Zombie Leader, Beast Leader, Sea Princess, Fatal War, Part 4. The battle raging in the upper part of the bridge, known as one of the largest in all of China and the whole world under the name Eastern Dragon's Back, was becoming more and more fierce with each passing second. Constant explosions were occurring one after another, and terrifying shock waves destroyed everything in their path. The sea waves were rising to the sky as if they wanted to defy the gravity of the world and the rules of nature more and more frequently than at the beginning, as the death count grew without stopping even for a moment. The zombies were undoubtedly the numerical majority, counting over 6 million zombies, among which there was no shortage of first-order existences, and among which there were 2 second-order zombies, with the ability to command armies of up to 5 million, as well as the support of over 20,000 mutant beasts, whose bodies had become tremendously robust after reaching level 20. The army of the Zombie Beast Alliance was holding a small lead at the moment. However, it was clear that the number of deaths on the Zombie Beast Alliance's side exceeded the total death count on the sea creatures' side. Therefore, it was unknown whether the trend of advantage that the Alliance had would continue, or if it would disappear in the next minute. The sea creatures were tremendously tenacious and fierce. Despite being out of the waters and fighting on dry ground, the territory of bipedal beings, it didn't matter if it was fish or crab, they all took at least 3 or 4 zombies, and maybe even a beast to the grave before perishing. Blood of different colors had turned the surface of the bridge into a kind of canvas, a canvas on which only a lunatic would ever want to draw, and which only a deranged person would appreciate seeing. Limbs of different species and of assorted creatures were scattered messily everywhere, while pieces of white broken bones marked a detailed contrast with the red blood of the beasts, blue of the sea creatures, and black of the zombies. There were different battlefields even though they were all fighting on the same bridge. On one side was the least important but at the same time the most sanguinary battlefield of all. This was the battlefield where unclassified existences and first-order existences fought for supremacy. This was the battlefield where, regardless of race, regardless of whether it was zombie, beast, or fish, the victor and survivor devoured the body of the defeated and slain. On the other hand, there was the secondary battlefield. However, despite being only the secondary battlefield within this great war and not the main stage of battle, this secondary battlefield was undoubtedly fierce enough that the shockwaves of the encounter among the attacks of those fighting on it would crush to the bone any existence of the less important battlefield that came too close in an oversight. This battlefield, despite being only a secondary battlefield, had the potential to influence the main battlefield, as those fighting here were almost all second-order existences. Finally, and apart from the two battlefields mentioned above, there was the main battlefield. The main battlefield was the fiercest and most terrifying of all, even though only two existences fought on it. This battlefield had no fixed space, since the two combatants could be on the bridge now, but the next instant they could be exchanging blows and magic attacks thousands of meters above. The night sky, vaguely covered by clouds, was now completely clear, and although there were no stars visible, the full moon witnessed the loss of thousands and dozens of thousands of lives being lost in a matter of seconds. The night that should have been dark was pushed aside by bright lightning and fire chains that illuminated the surroundings. The already fierce winds in the middle of the sea became even more powerful when wind-like magical skills hit the bridge in such a way that even standing on the structure would be an impossible task for an unevolved existence. Bang! A wave over 600 meters high rose into the sky with a diameter of over 300 meters, covering part of the battlefield. This wave had formed as a consequence of the fatal clash between the physical attacks between the two existences facing each other, in the middle of a deadly dance, in which a single misstep would cause the music to stop, as one of its participants would be destined to fall not long after. The wave was soon pulled back by gravity, but much of it was scattered everywhere. As it hit the bridge, the bodies of some zombies and even some sea creatures were turned to flesh pulp due to the pressure with which the torrent fell, and only the beasts whose bodies were more powerful managed to endure. However, there were many more zombies, sea creatures, and even mutant beasts that were swept into the deep waters. The zombies and beasts that fell into the sea fought as long as they could, but their efforts were completely futile as the same sea creatures that had been dragged back into the water devoured them. In the water, the sea creatures were king and could finally exhibit 100% of their strength. How can this be possible? The zombie leader shouted indignantly and furiously at the same time. His red eyes glared at the human in front of him intensely enough to imprint every feature of his body as he said, "You're just a first-order human. I'm a zombie who broke through the third-order barrier 2 days ago, and I even have the Duke subclass. I refuse to believe that a human can beat me." Saying that, the zombie leader kicked the bridge with all its power, causing thick cracks over 100 meters long to spread out. The zombie leader was like a mad beast that wanted nothing more than to tear Xietain into 1,000 chunks as it charged straight at him. The zombie leader flatly refused to accept it. With so many zombies under his leadership, he was an existence that enjoyed a 200% increase in his battle power. How could he accept that a first-order human was defeating him? It was simply impossible. Even if the zombie leader did not know the difference between human and zombie subclasses, he was not willing to believe that with his entire army numbering in the millions, the boost he received was no greater than the boost a human received from a few tens of thousands. Xietain advanced to meet the zombie leader's attack instead of retreating. His spear was like unstoppable golden lightning flashes, as no matter what his enemy did, Xietain's attacks always pierced his skin. Foul-looking purple blood began to stain the leading zombie's body, and even though his high health helped his wounds recover at surprising speeds, it was clear that Xietan's attack speed was high enough to overcome the beast's recovery. Boom, 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 boom. Fierce explosions, one more terrifying than the other, shook the atmosphere. If this battle was not happening in the middle of one of China's largest mouths, then the world map would probably have to undergo several modifications. A first-order existence possessed enough power to turn a street 100 meters around into a pile of rubble, with one physical attack or one magical attack. A second-order existence possessed enough power to turn an entire village into a disaster of destruction with one simple attack. As for a third-order existence, a large village with more than 50,000 inhabitants could be devastated under the attacks of such a being. Were it not for the fact that Xietain was taking the force resulting from the attacks of the zombie leader with his body, and was it not for the fact that he was sending out most of the resulting energy between the clash of the attacks of the two, all living beings on the bridge except those second-order existences or those first-order existences specialized in defense, would have already been turned into chopped meat. Of course, Xietain would be more than happy to let them all become chopped meat, as this would make things easier for him as well. However, if he allowed such a thing to happen, he would be taking the risk of the bridge collapsing. Besides, Shangyun Bingshu was there. In fact, Shangyun Bingshu was the main reason why Xietain was practically crushing the zombie leader. Swoosh! Shangyun Bingshu swung her sword covered in a faint but beautiful silver radiance, and with a swift movement, she took advantage of the momentary carelessness of the zombie commander she was facing. Her blue eyes, as clear as the moonlight that shone brightly hanging over the sky, flashed with cold light within, as the male zombie commander's head appeared in her pupils, flying along with a raw torrent of uncontrolled blood, flowing from the neck of the creature. You have received the soul power of second-order zombie commander Yu on level 74. Shangyun Bingshu turned her body nimbly, and with a fierce kick, sent the lifeless body of her enemy flying towards the less important battlefield, and causing the death of several zombies that were struck by the sturdy corpse of the zombie commander. She had been fighting for only 5 minutes, but had already managed to take the life of a second-order existence. As if killing a second-order existence in just 5 minutes wasn't enough, Shangyun Bingshu was only a first-order existence of level 50, and zombies were the race that humans feared the most for obvious reasons. Shangyun Bingshu's cold gaze carefully scanned the different battlefields without moving from her current position. She only had 2 objectives at present. Her first objective was to prevent any creature present from intervening in the battle Xietain was fighting. As long as there were no zombie, beast, or sea creature trying to affect the course of the clearly won battle that had not yet culminated, Shangyun Bingshu would not attack and let them kill each other, as this would make things a little easier for the humans. Last but not least, by no means least, Shangyun Bingshu's second target was perfectly leveling up with one of Xietan's targets. Ice ground, she whispered softly. A magic circle of over 1,000 meters shone under her feet for a second, and from within it emanated a large amount of frozen fog. The frozen fog soon transformed into a thin but at the same time extremely hard layer of ice that stretched over 2,000 meters along the bridge. Shangyun Bingshu made sure to synchronize her ice maker skill with Xietan's blood manipulation skill as best as possible, so that the ice ground and the blood barrier became tough defenses for the bridge. Above all, she made sure to cover the areas where the shark man of the marine race and the last zombie commander clashed against each other, and the possible points where Xietain and the zombie leader would exchange blows. If not for her, not only would Xietain be in a death grip due to his physical and mental exhaustion, but the bridge he was desperately trying to protect would probably have already collapsed at this point, as a result of the fierce shockwaves and physical or magical attacks that missed their course and ended up hitting the bridge. Erg. The attention of Shangyun Bingshu was quickly attracted by the cry of pain from the zombie leader. She could easily recognize it now after having heard the creature screaming and roaring his anger non-stop for every time Xietain inflicted wounds that could not be ignored. However, this time it was different. In full upward flight, Xietan's golden spear traced a beautiful golden arc. In full descent, the left leg of the zombie leader was detached from the rest of his body, as more and more blood flowed out from the severed flesh. Great! Shangyun Bingshu clenched her small fist excitedly as she stared at Xietain with shining eyes. On the other hand, the zombies became frenzied, and their attacks became more ferocious as the second-order zombie commander roared furiously and stopped worrying about defense, attacking with the intention of killing the second-order shark man, even if in the process he suffered severe damage. It was clear that the zombies also sensed that things did not look good for them and their race. Just at that moment, and precisely when the body of Xietain was beginning to be dragged down by the gravity of the world, the sea that was raging violently suddenly calmed down. The sea creatures that were furiously fighting zombies and beasts did their best to force their enemies back before retreating to one end of the bridge and jumping into the water, as if by prior agreement. Xietain frowned hard and suddenly had a bad premonition. He decided not to chase after the zombie leader, and instead stood next to Shangyun Bingshu at the first instant his feet touched the frozen bridge. Shangyu and Bingshu also tensed, but she said nothing and stood firmly by his side. Regardless of what would happen, things were already as they were, so there was no need to fear. Besides, she also had no plans to run away and leave Bai Zemin fighting alone, not now that she had enough power to assist him. Swoosh! The sea suddenly underwent another change again. As if singing a beautiful melody, the waves danced gorgeously as one of these waves slowly rose into the sky, only stopping once it reached 300 meters high, just 100 meters above the bridge. Standing onto the wave were two creatures. One of them was a beautiful woman, beautiful to the point of being able to steal the breath of any living being. She had dark blue hair, blue eyes, white skin without imperfections, her upper body was partially naked, and only had two seashells covering her generous-sized bosoms. The most surprising thing, however, was that her lower body was not like that of a normal human woman. She had a long fish tail. She was a mermaid.